Forward. Great. So thank you, everybody. I should just make myself spotlight. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. I am Jeffrey DeRose, the director at the College of Staten Island Tech Incubator. The CSI Tech Incubator is an institution focused on driving economic growth through technology education and by providing entrepreneurial resources and support. Here at the Tech Incubator, we believe that if we can help supply you guys with the right information, the right networks, and the right resources, we can help set you guys up for long-term success in both the technology and entrepreneurial fields. So with that being said, thank you all for coming out. I also just want to say thank you to Verizon for sponsoring this event. You know, Verizon wanted us to provide a professional development workshop series. So some of you guys have been on the previous ones, and if you haven't, they are on YouTube, and we will share that link in the follow-up email. The previous events we had was one around AR, VR technology. We had one around building a career in cybersecurity. Today, we're going to be doing data science and AI. Next month, we're going to have IBM. A person from the IBM quantum computing team is going to come and talk about building a career in quantum computing and the capabilities of that type of technology. And then we're going to have somebody from Facebook or Meta from the AR/VR team come and talk about building a career in software engineering. So once again, thank you all for taking the time out this evening to invest in yourselves and your own education. And thank you, Greg, for giving your time to our students and our community, and just being willing to share your experience and your knowledge to help people build successful careers in the data science and AI space. And with that being said, Greg, I'd like to just give you the floor to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Greg Ugwi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ThinkNum, and I'm working on WeFrench, the founder of WeFrench. So those are the two companies I founded. Prior to founding companies, I was a strategist at Goldman Sachs, and prior to that, I studied mathematics at Princeton University.
Excellent, excellent. So, it sounds like you come from a great background. And before we get into the topic, I maybe would like you just to talk a little bit about the work you were doing at ThinkNum and the work you're doing now at WeFrench. I know both are data science and AI platforms to an extent, and I think you're doing interesting stuff. So just love to hear what you're doing on those fronts. Sure.
So the way I'll describe it is, so I guess I'm just going to start from so the way I describe it is this. So I was a strat at Goldman, and when I was a strat at Goldman, we were studying non-agency bonds. When you're a strat, you're kind of the geek or the nerd, and the saleswomen and salesmen are sort of the alpha men or alpha women, and they are taking the risk, and you are supposed to help them with technology to make better decisions. So we build models to predict, okay, who would default and who wouldn't on their mortgages. And based on that, the risk takers take risk. So I really enjoyed this role. And one bottleneck we ran into is we needed data from the web. So we needed to know how our home price is performing in real time. And nobody would give us that data. So I was thinking about it. I was talking to my friends in the industry, and I realized more and more economic activity is going online. So people are shopping online, people are leaving reviews online, people are posting jobs online. And if you can collect all this data, it can help you make better decisions on where to invest, what companies to build, and things of that nature. Like if you think of humanity, since Mesopotamia, we've never had that kind of data, detailed data on economic activity. In Mesopotamia, they started counting sheep and cattle so they could tax people. And then think of in the Bible, 7 fat years and 7 lean years so they could plan. We were talking of planning with AI, but they were using data to plan. So now we have detailed economic activity. What are the product prices? How are they changing? How does that help you understand inflation and things of that nature? But nobody was capturing and structuring that. So I started building ThinkNum to work on that. And as I was building ThinkNum to work on that, I did that for like 10 years, and now we're selling the company. And then the next project I'm working on is, if you think of small businesses, think of your local coffee shop, or think of people building franchises. So how do you decide, okay, I want to open a McDonald's store here, and will that help you make money as an entrepreneur, as a franchisee? So really improving, and think of all the craftsmen and craftswomen since Rome that you build something you're local that creates value, that gets you customers, and you have a special way of doing something. Now, if you could teach anyone in the world that's interested in doing that, then you have a franchise like McDonald's and things. So really using data to solve that problem. And I'll be happy to show you more on how you decide which franchise to buy or which franchise not to buy. So those are the kinds of problems I'm interested in solving. More and more data in the world help entrepreneurs, investors make better economic decisions.
Wow, no, very interesting. Can you dive a little bit more into what you were doing on the data end with ReFranch and Thinkum? Like, I know WeFranch, you guys are helping automate like the application process, or maybe automating like the legal process. I think there's different processes that you're automating. Maybe just for the crowd, right? So they get to understand on a granular level, like, what are you exactly automating?
Sure. So I'll just take a step back and think of the franchise industry. So 800 billion in revenues goes through franchises. So you can think of gyms, hair salons, restaurants. Restaurants are very popular where they are franchises. So you can think of McDonald's, a $200 billion company. So they might have 5,000 different McDonald's locations, and each of those will have an owner. So in other words, how do you become a franchisee of McDonald's? What it is like they'll provide some data on this is the profitability of McDonald's and so forth, so on and so forth. And it might cost you $1 million to buy a franchise license in a specific territory. And then you can now open your own local McDonald's. You're now a business owner and you can make money. So you have to, think of the franchisee, think of the local small business owner. This is a huge decision. It costs like 100,000 to $1 million to open your local, whichever franchise you pick. There are over 100,000 to pick from. And if you pick the right one, you could become very wealthy. And if you pick the wrong one, it could ruin your financial life. So it's a very important decision. Of course, there's regulation from the FTC that requires them to provide a lot of data, financial data on this is how much income they tend to make, this is how much profitability they have, these are how many that close. So really collecting all that data and structuring it to make it easy for a franchisee to make a decision. But what we discovered when we ran into this is the most important thing will actually be speaking with people who have done it before, thinking of other McDonald's franchisees, other owners, and collecting data on what is their work-life balance. How are they happy with their franchise, or do they treat them fairly? Capturing that as data at scale is literally the most important thing, but no one was doing that. So we started collecting our reviews and structuring it, and I'll be happy to show you guys. I'm providing that as data to franchisees that have to make a decision. The reason why I'm sort of harping on this is I think for me, my experience as an entrepreneur in data science, I think that's the key thing. So find someone, some market of people. First of all, what is a market? A market is a set of people that reference each other when making a buying decision. So you find a market, figure out a problem where they have to make this big decision in their life. At some point, it will flash in their brain, it will flash 0 or 1. Buy this franchise or don't buy this franchise, right? And then figure out how to help them make better decisions so they have a better hit rate. So if you have a tool, any data science, it has to be doing that on some level. If you can do that, then you can create economic value and you're solving a real problem. So that's my approach.
No, that's excellent and very impressive work. And it seems like you are constantly tackling problems that no one else is tackling. I'm just curious, like as an innovator, like what is it like operating in this space, right? Like, you can't reference anyone else's work. You can't go and read a textbook that will give you the solution to how to solve this problem. What is it like just operating in that space of like kind of like no man's land, right? No one has done this before. Maybe there's people thinking about it, but no one's successfully tackled it. And it seems like you have been able to consistently tackle these big data problems.
Yep. So I think, it's an incubator. We're talking of entrepreneurship. We're stuff really focusing on that. And I think in general with data science, you remember, by its very nature, it's experimental. So I think to some extent, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to have that risk-taking appetite. And it's part of it is curiosity. Like, I think you think of like the wild, wild west when, quote unquote, like, people discovered the wild west, the edge of the world. So it's not like it wasn't like Paris that is fully built, the city of light, the Eiffel Tower. It's more, but there is a lot of land. So there's risk and reward. Now, if you can figure out, now the Wild Wild West has become like, California, and you find gold and you find oil. So in other words, if you want to be an entrepreneur, a big part of it is there has to be some element of you want to experiment, you want to discover something new, you want to solve a problem. So that's the approach I take. So you can't really follow the crowd, as you said. Even in markets, you trade markets, you're looking for alpha. So you're looking for a differentiated view that you have that is correct. So now you have to have a process of, remember, the crowd is usually right, right? So now you have to have a view that is against the crowd and correct. So you have to strike out many ideas and find the idea that, and to some extent, it has to be something you care about. So I'll explain, like, for example, myself. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and it's a Nigeria is a poor country. And I was one of the poorest people in Nigeria. So I grew up in a poor family. I was good at taking tests. So when I was 10 years old, I went to the richest high school in Nigeria. It so happens that the richest people in Nigeria are actually very rich. Anyway, so for holidays, I'll go back to, I'm going somewhere with this story, but for holidays, I'll go back to where I'm from. And then I'm with my parents, I'm with my friends. I believe my parents worked hard. I thought they were smart, and I still think they are. But we just couldn't make ends meet. It was just so hard. And then my friends in school, it seemed like it was just easy for them to just play some calls, just make some money, and they just make. So and then eventually I went to Princeton. It was more of the same. Like my roommate who works at Think now, Boris, he's my closest friend. He was my roommate in college. His family owns like the biggest hotel chain in Colombia. It just seemed easy for him to make money. So I was always interested in this problem of how do you create economic value? Why is it that because it's not just brute force, it's not just working harder. Like, why is it that some people find it so easy to make money? You just think of like Switzerland, and some people find it so hard. And Lloyd Blankfein said, we're doing God's work when I worked at Goldman. And this was during the 2008 crisis. So he got killed in the media. But I really think that if you have the right ideas and you have capital applied to those ideas, then you can move millions of people out of poverty. South Korea, in the 60s and 70s, people used to escape from South Korea to go to North Korea. But they started building the economy correctly, finding out what people wanted, investing in those things. So you start growing 2% every year. After a while, after 50 years, it compounds and you've gone far. So those are the kinds of problems I want to solve. The point is, I deeply cared about ThinkNum, building this alternative data for investors. And I deeply care about WeFranch. How can you help people buy and invest in the right franchises and become business owners? So in other words, taking that risk, it's not really a risk for me. You get to learn, you really care about it. And so it's a trade-off that you make, but there is risk, but you have to embrace it, it shows.
Yeah, no, wow, that's a phenomenal story. And I mean, I would love to dive deeper into that, but I definitely want to get the presentation going, but it sounds like you have a phenomenal background. But with that being said, let's maybe dive into the presentation, and the floor is yours.
Cool. So I'm going to share my screen, and obviously I've already talked a little bit about my path, but I think the presentation will be a more structured format. So I'll certainly skip on some areas I've already talked about. So I think I already talked about the beginning. I was from Lagos, Nigeria. I came to Princeton to study math, and then there are some lessons here. I do think, as many people here are computer science students, I think for me, at least coming from a humble background, leaning into some hard skill sets is very valuable. Now, I think the most valuable skill set tends to be soft skills and problem solving in general, but having that, as you can always fall back on that kind of thing. You bring that to the table has been useful. After that, I went to work at Goldman Sachs. I was pretty much starting my career in 2008, learning. So one thing I'll talk about is go into an area that you care about, and also focus early in your career about learning as much as possible, as fast as possible. Like a sponge, you're trying to soak up stuff. Then eventually I founded ThinkNum Alternative Data. So that's one thing I'll talk about. One thing is owning your work. I don't think you necessarily have to be an entrepreneur, but I do think you don't just want to be a paper pusher, quote unquote. So you want to be somewhere where you own your work, you get to take risk, and you get to live and die by the results. I think that's, as humans, that tends to be more fulfilling versus where you're just mailing it in. So I think that's just important. And finally, I'm working on WeFranch. As I said, it's about the franchise industry. It's an underserved industry. I think it's important and I care deeply about it. Cool. So now I'm going to, so these are some of our clients. These are clients at ThinkNum. So, we crawl data from the web and we provide data to all kinds of BlackRock, Goldman, JP Morgan, Bank of America. They use this data to make better decisions. So it took us a long time to get there, but it was really about, focus on solving problems for a set of users. So figure out the markets. If you're going to raise VC as an entrepreneur, though, you should find a big market. But I'll argue as an entrepreneur, whether it's a big or a small market, figure out a market that you care about, because you're going to spend a lot of time talking to these people. You're going to have to figure out where they are. So if you have some empathy for those set of users, it makes your life easier. Versus if it's just like, I can hardly swim. So if I'm selling something to swimmers, it would just be challenging. Imagine over 3 years, you just have to be talking about different things of swimming and you don't really care. Versus I love soccer. So if I was building something for soccer players, my life would just be slightly easier. And entrepreneurship is hard enough that if you just enjoy it a little bit, you have an edge when you're competing with other people that don't really care. So that would be the first thing. I just really cared about markets, so it really helped. Cool. Then here's one thing I'll talk about, like even as a data scientist, whether or not you're being an entrepreneur or you just want to work in an entrepreneur yourself or you want to work in an entrepreneurial company. I think Steve Jobs said this, you're not necessarily recruiting, like now if I'm recruiting, you're not necessarily recruiting people with the most that have been doing, machine learning for 30 years. Instead, you're looking for people that have the latest technology right on their fingertips. So it's not about, I've been doing this over and over. It's a matter of are you on top of ChatGPT 4? Do you know what the latest trends are? Do you know what's working and what isn't? So if you're picking a programming language, why are you deciding to use, Java versus Python? Or, so in other words, I would say in my experience, most of the value, and I think Jeffrey talked about it, when he says it's the wild, wild west, you're trying to get to the edge of human knowledge. You're on the shoulders of everyone else. And that is where the most value is created, in my opinion. Just think of IBM, think of all the work they do versus OpenAI. OpenAI happens to be playing on the edge, so they're capturing a lot of the value, versus IBM, they might have all these mainframes, but no one cares. Cool. So the next thing that has worked for me in my career, and Jeffrey sort of hinted at this, how do you find these big problems no one cares about? I think taking a step back and trying to observe macro trends. So trends that have nothing to do with you and I. You couldn't stop it or you couldn't make it happen. As an entrepreneur, I'm not trying to create a wave. You're trying to find a wave that's already there and surf it. I think the perfect example of this would be Jeff Bezos at Amazon. So he was working at D. Shaw, and then he was doing analysis, and he saw that the internet was growing at a very rapid rate, and it was compounding. So he figured out, wow, this thing has been growing for 5 years, and it's only going to keep growing. Or, at some point, Zuck will say, okay, this social media is growing, it's going to get to everyone in the world. And then you build something in that space. So so now the wave is carrying you. You're more, versus if you're going against the wave or you're working on something. So you have to observe macro trend and then try to solve problems in the direction that it's going, if that makes sense. So for us, a big part of it was ThinkNum is economic activities going online. People are shopping online. That's giving us a lot of data, whether they like it or not. People have to post job listings online. Now they have to post their salaries. They have to employee reviews. So just start collecting all that data and you're building a history. And as they post more stuff, you just grow. So that has been a powerful, driver for us. And there are always trends. Things are always changing. Things are always coming in and going out. So being able to pick the right wave to ride is very important. The next thing I'll emphasize, and I think you guys are doing it, is networking. So for example, how did I get a job at Goldman? This was in 2008, so it was a hard time. I emailed Margaret Holland. She happened to have gone to Princeton, and she also studied math. And I explained that, I studied math and I'm, trying to get into finance. It's my passion. And that way, you'll be able to learn more about opportunities and you'll be able to go. So that's been important. Like even just networking with Jeffrey, just, I'm working on Refranch, I speak with him, he invites me to come and speak at certain places. For example, I'm hosting an event, I invite him. So just finding people that want you to win. It's not necessarily transactional. You're just trying to connect with people, be open-hearted, and try to do things. For example, I'm hosting this event on Product Hunt. I'll invite all of you. If you want, you can, feel free to get an invite. But it's something I'm doing with Product Hunt and Contra NYC, Climate Tech. It's just to learn. There is no immediate gain for me. But if you can bring people together, I think it tends to add value over the long run in your career. That would be so network. Cool. So the core of it, I'll say probably this is the most important thing, is solve real problems for users. If you can solve problems for users, you will always have a career. It doesn't matter what the environment is. So if you just have that mentality. So I'll tell you a parable that has worked for me. So imagine you're a parent and you have two sons. So one of them is very strong, very fast, very athletic, and the other one is just normal. He's not too strong, And then when there's a storm and it blows away your wall, so you need to rebuild your wall. And your super strong son says, no, I can't do this now. I need to go and lift weights. Sorry, no time. But then wolves are coming into your house. But your regular son, just regular size guy, comes and he helps you build it. Or there's another storm and the roof caves in and now water is pouring into your house. Your strong son is like, no, sorry, I can't do this now. I have to go and I have to take a nap. Versus your regular size son just helps you patch your roof. Who are you going to value more? You're not going to value someone just because they're strong. It's the person that when you have a problem, when you have a need, they came there and they helped you. So if you think of the world that way, think of the world as the parents. Try to figure out what problems does the world have. So forget about what you want. Let's say I want money, I want promotion, I want prestige. Forget about all of that. Just think about what problems are there in the world that the world is telling you that it needs, and then figure out how to solve those problems. So I think having that mentality, I think it's key to adding value. Even in a company, figure out when you get in the company, figure out what problems do they have? And then, okay, I have some skills. Which ones can I tackle? And tackle them, add value. I think, that's how that leads to, basically, that's how you create value in the world. And ultimately, it comes back to you. So one thing I'll talk about is data science. I think we talked about it earlier. I used to be a strat, as I said, and I'll be sitting next to like a partner at Goldman, Swenny, and then beside him is Edwin, his MD. Anyway, so they're making decisions on, so think of the strat thing. So there'll be many people that are collecting data, blah, 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 pulling this data, build many fancy things. But many times the end user, they might be using a simple report to decide, should we buy more mortgages or less mortgages? So if you built a tool that helped them do their job easier so they can go home, and they used your tool when they decide, should I buy more mortgages or less mortgages? And when something is broken with the tool, they're going to turn to you. Eventually, they'll start relying on you because you're focusing on the end user, how they get value. So maybe other people at the background are pulling in data that does all these fancy things, fancy models, eigenvalues, eigenvectors, this and that. If you're not really focused on the end user, you could get caught off. So when it's bonus season at Goldman, you won't get anything, even if you were doing all this thing in the background. So with data science, I think you need to have a clear path to the end user, how they use your tool to make decisions, and whether it's within your organization, outside the organization, and if you are adding value that way, I think then your career tends to progress well, in my experience. So exactly. So I sort of described like Refranch and the problems we solve. So this is an example where people need to understand I need to get actual validated reviews from franchisees to understand. So here I'm just giving an example. So every day now we have people, so this is an example. Just think of McDonald's. So Mosquito Joe will be an example of a franchisor. And this franchisee is telling everyone, this is the worst decision I've ever made. getting in this business with these people. They're focused on squeezing as much money. So think of it. Think of if you were considering buying this Mosquito Joe, and now you're able to get access to this data. So all these reviews and this information, like these specific scores, that will help you. And there's nowhere else in the world to get this information, and it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands. So try to find a problem like that, and then just find a simple solution that solves it. And then from then on, you can add bells and whistles, if that makes sense. So that has been our, our path. Just so I'll say this is an example. Cool. So I think we already talked about this, but find an underserved market you care about. Like, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And remember, if you're trying to be an entrepreneur or even in data science, the journey is going to be very hard. So you might as well make it a journey. Like, if you're competing with we both have to run a marathon. If you're not into running and you don't, like, if I am not into running, I hate running. I don't want to win the marathon. And someone else just loves running. Over like 10 years, like it would be like torture for me. Like, the treadmill was a torture device versus people in Kenya, they just run. Like, they just get up and run. So they will tend to win over time. So you need to find, and everybody, I think Einstein said, like, if you try to, put a bird in a swimming competition, it will seem like, it's very stupid. So find a market that's, to me, that's the most important thing. Find something that you personally care about, and then use all the resources you have, all the skills you've built on to solve real problems in that market. Get those big decisions right, and everything else in your career tends to follow. Cool. I think I talked about this. For me, I think one thing I've learned in my career is taking ownership for it. So if you're doing work, you want to, like, sign your name on it. Let people know, speak up for yourself, advocate for yourself, let people know this is what you worked on, this is what you believe in, this is what you stand for. And then if the results turn out great, okay. If they don't turn out great, okay. But either way, you're going to be fine. So there's convexity. So there's an option we have. So if you have the courage to put your name to your work, do great work, put your name to your work, you capture value in the world. Most people make money through equity, not through just earning a paycheck, or even if it's a bonus. But forget that. Even just being engaged with your work, the fact that you're taking risk and you're going to, if the results are good, you stand up for it. If not, they're not good, but stand behind your work. I think that's an important lesson, in my opinion. Cool. We've talked about this, like, lifelong learning. In data science, remember, we're going to be finding markets we care about. We're going to be finding ways to add value. So those might not be, you need to be open-minded and being, like, when I first started, I knew nothing about mortgages at Goldman, but I'm willing to learn. This is how mortgages work. This is a subprime bond, an optional bond. This is what matters. This is how they're thinking of this. From people that have been doing this for decades. So you might be snobbish and be like, I know math and, I know computer science, so I don't need to know this. But I do believe if you're willing to engage with the problem, understand about franchises, whether it's blue collar work, try to understand what do they think about when they're making a decision, learn as much. I think it's a superpower almost, that you use programming and math almost more, and data science as a superpower to find special solutions, versus if you don't really know anything about the base market to begin with, you're not a domain expert, then it could, you could just be solving, you have a solution that's looking for a problem. Cool. I'm happy to stay in touch. If you guys have questions in the future, or you want to, you just want to stay in touch, here's my email. Feel free to reach out. So Jeffrey, I think that's all I had. I don't know if anyone has questions.
Yeah, I actually have a few questions just to keep the conversation going. I think you gave some really great points. I actually really love that you kind of made this data science and AI topic very people and human focused, which I think most people don't realize, right? Of course, you do need to be deeply technical and strong with math, right? But ultimately, like you said, it's really about entering a space, entering an industry, understanding the needs of the people within that industry and providing value to those people using your data science and mathematics as a superpower. So that, I think this was a great conversation. But some questions that I may have is, let's say, I'm a freshman in college, or I'm a high school student. and I want to start my career in data science, right? Maybe from like an internship level. What should I be thinking about? Are there any tools that I should be using? Any tools that they should be thinking about to build their skills, et cetera?
Yep. So I sort of clicked into this, and it says tools, beautiful. So this is a more technical thing where I was given specifically on what we do, which is data engineering, which is collecting data from the web. So in other words, at a high level, how I'll do it is, so if you were like when I was starting, a big problem, as I said, was how do you structure this data from the web? And at any time, the problem is going to keep moving. So it's hard to give a prescriptive thing. So that's what I'm saying, find the problem that the world has now. But I'll tell you how we solved it, how I approached it when, I started. So when I started, I was at Goldman, and I was writing code in something called Slang. So now that had nothing to do with the web. It was just a proprietary Goldman language. So I had to figure out, okay, how do I get data from the web? So you have to start doing research. And people are using web, they're using Python, and you have to learn tools. In this case, I learned tools like Beautiful Soup. Yeah, it helps you understand how the DOM works. So the document object model. Yeah, I had to understand HTML. You have to understand, various CSS things. And so you read the docs. So find the problem, figure out the tools people are using at that time, and then start trying to understand, okay, how does this work? How does request work? How do you, and you constantly have to keep learning new. So request to be another tool we are using that I knew nothing about, but you have to figure it out, because that helps you get data from the web at scale. So that's how, Selenium will be another tool that we use, because it helps you replicate what the browser is doing. So if you're interacting with the browser, it will be very important. But I'll say the general lesson I'll give is, okay, figure out the problem you're trying to solve. And then there's Stack Overflow, there's GitHub, there are open source projects. Try to understand, okay, what tools do I need to learn? Read the docs. That's the way to do it. So I don't think there's anything you can, like maybe now people are using Python. In 2 years from now, are they going to be using Python? No one knows. But you need to figure out what are they using, and then jump in and start experimenting, build something simple, and go from there.
Yeah, I'm just curious, as you mentioned Python, would you say that's maybe the most widely used programming language for data scientists?
Yes, I'll say Python right now, it's by far the most widely used. Like almost everything is done in Python.
Yeah,
So
and what about pandas? Can you speak to pandas a little bit?
Yeah, so pandas, like I think it's a useful tool. I think it's for pulling in and structuring data. But I myself, I don't use pandas a lot. And I think the most important thing, in my opinion, is to know Python inside out.
Gotcha. And what about from a math perspective? There's so many different fields of math, right? There's linear algebra, there's multivariable calculus, there's statistics. Is there any field of math where you're like, hey, if you want to be a data scientist or a person building an AI, like you really need to know this topic inside and out?
Yes, so I think, I studied math, so the very nature of math, in my opinion, I think why I loved it, is essentially like statistics, algebra, graph theory, they're all the same thing in many ways. It's kind of like different views of the same thing. Anyway, so to keep it short, I'll say statistics would be very important now. I think having a full grasp of graph theory is very important, but algebra is very important. But really, like just knowing the fundamentals and trying to understand how they all relate to each other. Because if you're going to do any serious work in statistics, then you're going to have to know algebra and graph theory down the road. But so if to me, I'll say statistics is very important, but start with the problem. Like if you read any white paper, there'll be many citations, and then you need to dig deeper. Okay, what is this paper really? What do I need to know to understand it? What are the prerequisites? And that's how you treat it. So first know the fundamentals. Then once you know the fundamentals of all branches of math, the 3 branches of math, then focus on the problem you have, and then based on the prerequisite, what you need to, how much statistics do you need to understand to solve that problem, you learn that much statistics.
Gotcha. That I'm muted on that. That makes a lot of sense. And you know, I'm just curious. Before I ask the next question, did you do any internships, or was your full-time job at Goldman Sachs your first job in the space?
Sure. So I did an internship at Morgan Stanley the year before, basically my senior year.
Gotcha. And so my question is, like, you know, for the, because most people in the room will probably be pursuing internships in the space. What skill sets do you think employers might be looking for in a data science and AI intern, and what should they be, you know, thinking about in terms of like how they're structuring their resume?
Sure. I'll say like, you know, everybody's talking of ChatGPT now, but really whatever anyone is talking at the cutting edge. Because if you think about it, if you're if you're joining as an intern, it will be hard to compete with someone that has been doing statistics for 10 years on that specific problem. That being said, if ChatGPT 4 just came out and I know the API inside out and I know the implementation, I can immediately add value just by knowing how to code and knowing the API. So if it's to me, I'll focus on what is the cutting edge things to get my foot in the door, because that's where you can add value as a new person. When after you get in the door, now, how do you cement your position and things like that? But getting your foot in the door is really like, what is the latest papers? What is the latest, like in this case, ChatGPT 4? How do I know it inside out? That's how I think of it.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And, you know, is there anything, or maybe, how do I phrase this question? I guess what I want to get at is, like, you know, there are obviously people who, and you probably interact with them, people who, you know, they really have built long-term successful careers in the data science and AI space. You know, would you say there's, like, what are some of the common traits from a maybe technical, maybe not even keep it technical, but what would you say are some of the common traits of people who have built a long-term successful career?
So I think the key thing that I sort of highlighted is like being a lifelong learner. So, you know, this space, it's you know, constant research, like papers are just, think of how fast this space has been changing. So I'll say that's the main thing. So you can't just rest on your laurels. I'll say that's, like, I'll say Margaret Holden is someone that comes to mind. As I said, she had me at Goldman, and you have to keep on learning. You know, maybe she knew slang, now she had to learn Python and so on and so forth. So that's what I'll say one. And I say, like, two, just having the mindset, as I said, of how do I solve problems, believing in yourself and just trying to solve problems. So less focused on like politics or like making the most money, but just focusing on solving interesting problems. So that would just keep you engaged, and naturally you become a lifelong learner. So one test I tried to do, because this is white collar work. So if we are doing, imagine we are doing physical work, right, Jeffrey? And then you and I are doing physical work. And let's say I'm lazy. So I just come and I nap all day. And then you're working hard. Over time, you become stronger because you're lifting rocks, right? So a similar thing happens when we are doing white collar work. If you are not, when you have employees, some of them are going to be super engaged and others are just going to be moving paper around and just faking it. That's just reality. And then how do you know? It's easy if it's physical work. If it's mental work, if it's white collar work, it's harder. If it's creative work, it's harder. The way you know is the person that is engaged and working hard is going to learn faster. It's almost like, just like you get physically stronger, their mind becomes stronger. They will know more because they're truly engaged in the problem. Think of Picasso, think of Einstein. Into their 70s and 80s, they were still engaged with their work. So I do think a similar thing happens. So my point is, be engaged in the work, find something you're interested in, be a lifelong learner, focus on solving problems. Yeah, I'll say that in general, that kind of mindset.
I see your light went off. Do you want to take a second to turn your light back on?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me stop video.
And for those of you at home, I definitely want to give you guys a chance to ask some questions as well. Does anybody in the crowd have any questions? Feel free to drop it in the chat or maybe raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself. No one has questions. This is like a serious data scientist here. If you guys want to build a successful career, now is your chance.
I have a question. Testing.
Yes.
Oh, excellent. So I'm not too much of an entrepreneur or too much of a risk taker. I know that sounds a little paradoxical. But it's more like I'm also just curious about, first steps into how to sort of enter the field and sort of being able to showcase my skills, or at least get into a position that might help better me really make use of the skills that I learned, to the point where I can actually feel like a little more accomplished or more secure about what I've actually learned actually in practice. Do you have any sort of insights as to how I might be able to go about it?
Sure. So like the 2 cents I'll give, and you sort of take it for what you want, is, for example, get involved with some, like a project. Like it could be an open source project that you're passionate about. You code something up and you put it out there. It doesn't have to be to make money. It could be any open source project. And then you put it out there. What does that mean? You will learn something about, hey, someone used this, you've tried to get users to use your problem. So then you start learning more about how having empathy for non-programmers or non-data scientists, non-specialists. You learn more about how people actually get value from a tool, and you'll be putting your name behind something. And remember, if it really takes off and it becomes a popular library and everyone is using your tool, maybe you turn into the company, or maybe you get great roles. But just think of, whoever, I can't remember the name of someone that built actual Python as a tool. You build something and you put it out there. And then so basically, I guess that's what I'll say. Does that make sense to you? Like, work on some open source projects if you're a programmer, or work on some tool that solves the problem with someone, put it out there and put your name behind it. And then if it takes up, and it could, for example, people are talking about the problem with alignments, and they go on podcasts and they put out their views of AI alignment problems versus AI research. So AI alignment is running too slow. So eventually this means that AI is going to kill everyone. This is a risk. And they put out their views. It could be that simple. Like, you put out a view, you risk, and you put your name behind it. So you don't be at the back of the class. Instead, kind of like what you're doing now, raise your hand, say something, but do it on the internet, on the web. Like, create some tool, put it out there. I don't know. Does that answer? What do you think of that?
It definitely gives me more of an answer. I guess what's really getting to me is, like, I essentially learned how to do terraforming, and I'm still in the process of learning Python. I didn't go for, like, the 4 years of tech related schooling and training, but it was more like something I did on the side, almost as a hobby, like learning it from the ground up. So I don't really have the experience right now to sort of create a program from scratch, but more like tinkering with programs that already exist. So I'm not sure if I could put my name behind it, but it's definitely an interesting concept where maybe I can play around with it and try to get something out there. And even if nobody were to use it, at least it would showcase my skill to possibly in an interview. Do you think that might actually work as well?
Yeah, I think that works. Hey, you can partner with other people. So there are open source projects you can try to contribute to, or you can put out something. Like, it doesn't, like, just the fact that someone took initiative. I'm recruiting someone and they actually put anything out there, I respect them 100 times more than someone that never stepped on the battlefield. Or it could even be as simple as writing a blog post that this is what I learned, and you're just sharing your view. It doesn't mean you're trying to teach the whole world. Like, I'm here telling you about my career. It doesn't mean I'm Jeff Bezos or I'm Zuck that it's just, I'm sharing what I've learned. So I'll say, just having that mentality of just write the blog post of this is what I learned, this is my career, this is the path, and then someone will read it and you add value to the world, you answer their questions. I think just taking that kind of risk, or going on Stack Overflow and answering a question, that something about. I remember, if you can do any of those things, then to me, that tells you need to learn more. You need to develop your skills more in something. So let's say I can build a website, but I want to showcase my other Terraform skills. Maybe what I need to do is I need to learn how to build a website, and you're motivated to do that kind of thing. So just having that mentality, just running through and solving problems.
Yeah, if I could also add to that too, I think, um, building tools and contributing to open source products is one thing. I want to put out there. There are there's so much data out there on the web. I actually was also pursuing the data science field at one point in life. And so what I was doing when I was a CSI student myself and a computer science student, I would just go go get like stock market data and go run like linear regressions with like stock market data versus various economic data sets. So what I'm really saying here is that you could go online, find data sets that you could maybe ask an interesting question about, right? Like I might, it's like a simple version is like, I might say something like, hey, is there a relationship between interest rates and oil prices, right? And then I'll just go and use Python to compare those data sets historically, and then now I have an answer to that, right? And just kind of like what Greg is saying, right? Just being proactive, right? Most people are going to go for that internship or those first jobs with just a resume. If you could show that you've done something proactive in the space, right? Like just messing around with data, writing a blog post, contributing to something on Stack Overflow or GitHub, you're going to really separate yourself from the pack, by just being proactive.
Exactly. So if you just like think of Kaggle competitions is another good one. Like
Kaggle, yes.
Yeah. So when Jeff was saying that, it brought me. So it doesn't matter what your scores are, it's just that you're out there taking competitions. Like to me, just like because as a business person, as someone, an industry operator, that just separates you from the crowd. I think someone had a question in the chats.
Yes, somebody did. Aaron, do you want to ask your question out loud? If you're comfortable. Maybe Aaron doesn't, that's okay. I'll ask the question. As someone, okay, his computer doesn't have a mic, no worries. As someone who strives for online privacy, I was wondering if you heard of the private search engines of Brave Search and DuckDuckGo adding AI to their search index. And now Google is adding AI to their Gmail server. Is it saying Gmail? Yeah, Gmail service. Do you believe that this AI is a privacy concern, which it can exploit and invasively track users using the search engine?
Yes, so I think so one of the big problems is in AI right now is alignment. So let's say you have AI and you claim that you optimize it to do something. How do you know that? Basically, it's just mathematically proven that there is no way you can guarantee that that is what to be optimized to do. It might start solving for something else. So that is related to this, because the truth is there's more and more data about like individuals that we keep collecting. And then there's regulation that is like how do you manage, like, everybody has an incentive to get more and more individual data on you, more and more of your private data. All these companies do. Like, Google makes so much money, Facebook makes so much money because they have more and more granular data. So how do you, as a society, how do we manage that balance where like one participant has, some economic incentive to capture all this data, but for the group, there's this externality that is not a negative externality for the entire group, is through regulation. So we try to regulate how people, Europe is taking a lead, GDPR, in how people store and use this data. But the private participants are so far ahead of the government, like the senators. The senators are not AI experts versus people at Google and Facebook and DuckDuckGo and Brave. They're all going to be AI experts. And the government is never going to be able to hire these experts. So in other words, the cops can't keep up with the robbers. So yes, I think it's a real problem. As an individual citizen, how do you solve that problem? I don't know. I really don't know. Yeah, I think it's a real problem where AI can be very dangerous and it's in the hands of private participants, and the incentives of AI itself and the owners of the AI are going to be not necessarily going to be what is best for society. And so capitalism is not really built to solve that problem. That's what regulation is for. And I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, I'm wondering, is this going to be your next project? I think it's not a big problem.
Yeah, exactly. I think my hands are full right now, but maybe for Aaron, you can keep digging, and that's how you find something that you're really passionate about, and then you find some solution, and then you put it out there, and you see if you get traction.
This is true. There you go, Aaron. You might be sitting on a $1 billion idea. Shannon, I see you have a question. Do you want to ask your question out loud, Shannon?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I was wondering what's your thoughts on kind of tackling the bias that exists within machine learning algorithms and other AI products or?
Yep. So I think that's so that's also a hard question. I think I was telling Jeffrey originally, I do think it has to start with so there has to be some semantic layer, there has to be some knowledge graph. So I'm sort of Nigerian, so I'll just use this as an example. So imagine let's just say, let's just say black and white people. The truth is the average black person has 1/10 the wealth of the average white person. So if you, and having, so in other words, if I think of, let's go earlier. If we just take before you allowed black people to play in the NBA, if I just used AI and I just train it on who are the people that are making the shots that have the most points, it's going to say white people, because black people don't have a chance to get into the NBA. And it has no way of, by just doing correlation, it has no way of knowing this information and this connection. So we have to use reason. So if you think a certain set of people, like women have never had the chance to, they didn't have the chance to vote for a long period. So if I say, okay, who tends to be using AI, who is going to be the next best president? Maybe you to pick a man, because that's, all it has seen so far is men. But we know this rule of women were only allowed to vote until XYZ. So you can't just rely on historical data. So you need a semantic layer, you need some rules. So I think the easier thing is always to rely on correlation. But I do think to build a fairer world, this has gone to the French Revolution, it was the same thing. If it wasn't just, so this was even within a certain society, the nobles, everybody that has had this name, if you were a descendant of Charlemagne the Great, then you tend to be the ruler. So if I looked at who is going to be the next ruler with AI, just historical data, it's going to be a descendant of Charlemagne the Great. But French regular people said, this doesn't make any sense. We don't have to just rely on the historical way things have been done. Anybody should get a chance, and we'll build a more égalité, fraternité. You build a more equal, a fairer society, and there was a revolution. I don't think it has to be a bloody revolution, but I do think we have to use reason. This was the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment. And the Age of Enlightenment was all about moving past correlation and using science, so using causation and reason. And I think that's even till today, from that Age of Enlightenment in the French Revolution, it carries to today with progressive agenda. So to some extent, I am kind of pretty political thing, which I shouldn't, and I think there are counter arguments, but I do think in general, we all get better. It doesn't have to, the rules don't have to link to my political agenda, but I think reason, semantic layer is a way to go past bias in machine learning. That's what I would say.
Okay, and can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
I don't know how much time we're on, but do you think that synthetic data can help kind of solve the problem of these underrepresented groups not being accounted for?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think synthetic data, it to be some way of for example, if I never had data on common people leading the French people, so I might say, okay, what is an agent? I create an agent that's like a common person, and what would create this field where what will it look like if they actually got to rule? So now I have a fairer sample. So I think that will be some way that's going in that direction. So if women were never allowed to vote, well, I can create in my sample, my historical sample, some leaders that will be like women. In this case, of course, they'll be synthetic, because in reality, the past was one path. Yes, so I think that is one way of solving that problem. But it involves, synthetic data will involve some amount of reason, some thinking of what is your hypothesis and what are you trying to get that synthetic data to approve? What distribution is your hypothesis saying will solve a problem, will be a better representation of what you're trying to solve, not just what happened to happen,
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful.
I have a question. You mentioned semantic layer a lot. Can you maybe just explain what that means in layman's terms?
Sure. So, I'm just trying to think of the easiest way to explain what I'm trying to say. So essentially, a semantic layer will say something like, okay, so let's say let's just use markets. And let's say one thing I could do is I could just say, just tell me the companies that tend to using historical data, just tell me which companies did well. Like which companies had good returns, their stock price went up. And let's say like when there was let's use the COVID shutdown, there was a COVID shutdown, and then there was work from home, and interest rates went down, and because tech companies, for whatever reason, they did really well. That's just historical fact. Like Apple, FANG, they did really well. So that would be an example of a non-semantic layer. I'm just saying these are the stocks that did well. And I could just say those companies will continue to win in the future. So that would be a non-semantic. That would be like sort of ChatGPT, OpenAI. It can just tell you which companies did well. It can immediately tell you that. Now, a harder way of saying, okay, a semantic way will say, okay, I'll make a thesis that companies that tend to focus on growth, like they tend to have cash flows long in the future, like tech companies, will do better when you cut interest rates. Basically, because you'll be discounting their future cash flows less. So their future cash flows will be worth more today. The present value of their future cash flows will be worth more. Versus companies that are paying off dividends right now, like brick and mortar businesses or whatever, because of the COVID shutdown, their revenues will be smaller. But more importantly, their present value is not going to improve that much by interest rates. However, when interest rates start going up, those companies so I shouldn't believe that those tech companies that did well during the COVID shutdowns will just continue doing well forever, because when interest rates go back up, then you're going to be discounting their future cash flows more. And so their stock price is going to go down. So where you have a cause and effect, you have some rules, you have some understanding of, I have some mechanics of how the world actually happens to work, a certain path we've taken, like physics. So I'm designing a game engine, like Boston Robotics. So there's something where they are building AI for a dog to figure out how to move around, but it has an understanding of what the world is. So this dog needs to plan how to open the door, how to go out, even like, self-driving cars. They have to understand rules about green, green, red, and yellow. So you have to encode all these rules into them. So I think that will be more like along the lines of semantic research versus OpenAI, where I'm just taking in text. I don't even read it. I don't know anything about it. I just take it and I say, tell me what's the next letter. If I say what's the next word that will come out, just tell me based on statistically, taking all the text on the internet and the words that tend to come out. So there is nothing semantic. There's no meaning. I don't need to know what means. I don't need to know what the means. It's just what the F tends to come out next. So that is not semantic. So I'm saying semantic is more like Boston Robotics of understanding how the world works into there. Obviously it's harder, but I think it's more, I'm personally more interested in it, and I think it's a useful safeguard.
Gotcha. No, that makes complete sense. Just asking that question for the crowd. Anyone else have any other questions? Feel free to ask. You guys don't got to be shy. Once again, we have a superstar data scientist here. It's not every day you get to meet somebody of Greg's caliber. No, okay. Well, then I guess we could wrap up here. Oh, Mary has her hand raised. Mary, feel free to ask your question out loud.
Okay. Was there a project that you worked on that you really liked, that you can maybe point us towards that we can take a look at and see, like how you worked on it, like a public project, or is everything private in private
Good.
repos?
Yep. So in terms of the repos I've worked on, so the repos, like really I've worked on them as my startups, like ThinkNum and WeFrench. And I'll say those two projects, they are proprietary. Like it's so in other words, I never went down the path of, like, certainly in the last 10 years, the work I've done has been so I think we have like case studies at ThinkNum. So if you go to thinknum.com, we have examples, all kinds of case studies I can post here that shows how our users get value. So I think checking out ThinkNum will be, but in other words, and if you have questions about how we actually built it, I think I was sharing the other example that talked about that. Like, feel free to reach out and I'll be, happy to tell you how we actually built it. But for now, I'm just going to post this link. So this is basically what I spent the last 10 years building. And it is not public. And in general, too, as well, I guess one thing I tend to talk about in terms of this career thing. So yes, I talk about early in your career, I think, like being open, doing projects, but ultimately, in my view, and I think I sort of hinted at this, even how I grew up and everything, I think a sustainable business or sustainable efforts, it has to be profitable. If you think about anything that you're doing, I guess you can do it for fun, that's fine. But if you're doing something, if you can get what you're doing, the work, your life's work, so the struggling artist, I'll shy away from that. But if you can get your life's work to be profitable, that means that you can generate more resources towards it. You can make it better. You can spend your whole time doing it. So I'm a proponent of open source to get going. But once you've gotten going, I'll say the first thing is you got to make sure, like that's my personal advice. Like if you can own equity, monetize your work, please do that. I certainly intend, that's how I tend to work.
Great advice. Shannon, feel free to ask your question.
My question's in regards to space technology. I know that AI and data science aren't really as utilized or not to their fullest potential beyond primarily satellites. Like, what do you see maybe in the next 10 years? Like, where do you see that field going? What do you see the possibilities as?
So to be honest, on this question, I will say I am not an expert. I'm absolutely not an expert. And I guess many people here are probably interested in space. I tend to not, and I think sort of Jeffrey was. So my interest, like, it tends to focus on people, like humans and like humanity, very human-centric view of the world. So space, I think to some extent it is, like when they say like, humans colonizing Mars and things of that nature. But I think there are so many problems that, in my view, that are more immediate. Even in alternative data space, people use space for collecting data on like agriculture and things like that. So that's what I tend to focus on. So if you just think of, you collect all these images online, but it can also be, if we can better understand, okay, these are the buildings, this is where there's traffic congestion, these are the conditions for growing, climate crisis. So if it helps, basically collecting image recognition. So you collect all that data and you can use it to think of building a whole, like a cleaner model of the world. So you can run experiments very detailed because you have a great view of the world. So I think, that to me is very interesting. But just like space exploration overall, like for me, it just like there's just not my specialty. That's I know very little.
I appreciate the honesty. That's another, I think, a great life lesson here. As much as right? If you don't know, it's okay to say that you don't know something. I think sometimes us as younger people, or when we're students, we don't sometimes feel comfortable saying we don't know. So I appreciate you just being honest that you don't know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the good things in life versus in school. So in life, you get to just say, like, I don't know, I'm not interested, I don't know, I'm not interested, as much as you want. So now you just remember, anytime there's going to take your time, anytime you're going to, even with people, where you're going to put your energy, where you're going to research into, you get to pick. So use that. So if something doesn't give you energy, you just get to say, Versus in school, your professor is going to tell you, you need to learn this in math, you need to learn this, and that's what you need to learn. Like, and these are the questions and you need to answer them. But in life, like life is hard, but the one thing is that you get to pick your battles.
That is a quote. Mary has her hand raised again. Mary.
So since you're talking about people analytics, do you have any kind of concerns regarding the use of AI and what would be considered like racial targeting or like replicating, you know, the human mind and the biased mind that we are living in reality, like online and in other types of technology? Like, do you have concerns about the way that the technology is being developed?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very much like we talked about. I think if you think of like a Monte Carlo simulation, where we followed one specific path, like all the good things and all the bad things, but it followed one path. And then when you're training AI on that path, then you run into dangers of without a semantic layer that says these are the other possible paths, and this is without doing that, you run into the problem of replicating and just multiplying all the problems we've done in the past. Of course, as I said, it quickly becomes political. So that's the problem with, I think that a big part of the challenge with research is two things. One is it's just more lucrative to build OpenAI, right? It's faster. Like you make, your startup grows faster, you get more growth. Like if you think of Boston Dynamics versus OpenAI, OpenAI is just far more valuable. Boston Dynamics, they've been doing great work since the 90s. And they are the cutting edge of like semantic research, but it's not going to be, it's almost like OpenAI is like a virus. It's like, in many ways, think of social media. It grows fast, whether it's good or not, it's kind of like amoral in many ways. Versus if you're trying to do work that is human-centered, that is rational, that is fair, how we define fair, then it's going to be, it might not be as lucrative, you know? So I think it's a challenge for humanity. Now, how do we solve that as a community? For example, I'll give one example of, if we think of a similar problem we ran into in the past, where you had like Microsoft and they were building an operating system, and it was just, they had this monopoly, and it was just so much easier for them to, and like, it's like basically everybody would just be working for Microsoft, and you just be working in some Excel spreadsheet because they could make so much money. They control the operating system. So there were a couple of things that happened. One is the government had to step in, and regulation had to stop monopoly for Microsoft. And secondly, like Linus Torvalds created an open like Linux, and then 98% of servers now use Linux, and it means many people get to program, many people get to contribute their ideas. So I think a similar thing has to happen, where like large corporations are doing research on AI, but hopefully like somehow through regulation and through like open source, which we kind of talked about doing research, we have to counterbalance that to create a human value-centered world. Otherwise, yeah, we run into this problem where we could all just be working for, you know, building Excel add-ons and just making Bill Gates richer and richer.
It's a scary world. Okay, Mary said that she'll be reading the case studies on clean web design. These are some insightful questions you guys are asking. So that's great. You guys also thinking about the future and thinking about the world and thinking about, you know, once again, not just data science and AI from a technical standpoint, but that's great that you guys are thinking about from a human standpoint, an equity standpoint, and that's great. You know, another thing, that's because, you know, you guys are asking such great questions around equity. I don't know how many people of color and how many women are in the room listening, but I want to say that this is just my point of view, of my worldview. You know, the best thing that we can do to make sure that we're creating an equitable data science and AI space is actually learning data science and being an active participant in the field, right? That's the other issue, that if we don't learn the field and learn the craft and enter the space, then, we're not going to have representation, like, and then also we're going to get left behind. So I just want to encourage you all, like, if you really care about like equity and inclusion in these spaces, the best thing that you could do is you yourself go out, learn the craft, master the craft, and be an active participant in the field.
Yep. So I think, like, to me that makes sense. I think, like, yes, like the first thing is, and then after you do that, like go out there, talk to more people, be open, try to share as much as possible with people that are trying to come up. But yes, the first step is learn the craft, speak up for yourself, do it with an open heart. And yeah, so the hopeful advice is, if we get more and more people, like, once again, it goes back to think of the printing press and think of before the age of enlightenment. Once again, essentially, if a few people control the knowledge, then it's not even good for them. So it's not like, so the more and more, when you have the printing press and you're able to spread knowledge throughout the world, so anybody can read and anybody can learn about AI, anybody can contribute to the space, then I think it creates a better world for everybody. And I think that's almost the only solution. So, because it's kind of like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if we can create a world that, anybody gets a fair shot to contribute, then I think that's the best, at least that's the best tool humanity has discovered, like, let's say, Western civilization, to combating the same problems we face with AI.
Yeah, absolutely, getting involved, and just to put it on the flip side perspective, right? Sometimes we're feeling like, or not sometimes we're feeling like, studies have shown that, right? Like, different AI tools have been developed that could be biased against people of color, be biased against Black people, et cetera. But the truth is that I'm just speaking frankly here, right? It's sometimes just like all white teams building tools and modeling it on all white data sets. And, if there's no one else in the room to just say, like, hey, these people may not necessarily be, racist with intent or looking to create this biased tool, but, like, if there's no one else in the room of color or female or whatever the case might be, then it's just going to be a lopsided space. So just reiterating, like, the best thing that we can do if we really want to create equity is to get involved, right? Not demanding people to, of course you want to demand people to be equitable, but the best thing we could do is to get involved, right? And, create that diversity by being engaged. Yep. Yeah. Right. And when it's just one type of person in the room building things, right? There's no other perspectives. And sometimes, I think it's just a real thing, right? People are just going through life doing things. On the flip side, right? If it's just like all Black males building tools, right? It's probably going to leave out women. It's probably going to leave out, Middle Eastern people, Asian people, white people, right? Like, it's just a real thing, so we need diversity. Great question, Rashawn. What online resources do you use to help you do your job?
So I'll say, obviously there's Stack Overflow. so I'll say Stack Overflow. I'll say another one is Hacker News. So news.ycombinator.com. So I get a lot of great information there. So I'll say that, like, Hacker News, you learn about the latest techniques on, and you basically, I'm going to post the link. I think, so if you guys start following that, I think, like, some of the best engineers, at least for me, it keeps me up to date. And of course, I'm going to assume people use Stack Overflow, but I'll still post it. This is more for programming.
Yeah, another really great tool for you guys to get on is hackerrank.com. I don't know if you guys are familiar with HackerRank, but just, you guys are, early in your careers, you're still learning the space. And I think the best thing that you could be doing is just practicing, right? Practicing problem solving. Let me go to hackerrank.com and I'll share my screen and show you guys what it looks like. When I was coding, I was definitely using HackerRank. Unfortunately, I don't code anymore. Maybe this thing has changed a little bit, but let me get the link. 1 second. Pretty much you could go on HackerRank and, they just give you simple coding challenges. You could pick whatever programming language you want to solve a challenge in, and you just keep doing that. Like I would recommend, maybe spending an hour a week on HackerRank. You guys do that for like 2 or 3 years, one, you're going to build a portfolio of real problems that you solve that you could show to employers. But most importantly, you're going to have your skills really refined. Like, when you think about, I think this is the other part of coding and excelling in these spaces, whether you're a data scientist or a software engineer or AR, VR, it's a skill set, right? And it's like performance sport, like an athlete. If Kobe Bryant isn't in the gym, for 4 or 5 hours a day for 10 years straight, like, he does not become the greatest ball player in the world. Like, and I think it's the same thing with coding. You need to constantly just be, even though it is a mental muscle, you need to constantly be exercising that mental muscle of problem solving. And that's a great tool to use for you guys. And then also employers can see that data. I even want to put out there that employers do interviews on HackerRank, so if you get familiar with it and the kind of questions that they're asking on HackerRank, that might even give you an edge in an interview, especially if the employer says, hey, go do this coding challenge on HackerRank. So I just want to give you guys that as well to hone your skills. Any last questions before we wrap up? We're getting to the end of the event. Okay, nope. All right, great. So thank you guys so much for coming out today. And thank you again, Greg. I hope to definitely bring you back. Yes, let me make this announcement. If you guys need a PG Clue credit, you can fill out this form that Camilla just sent in the chat. We will also send a follow-up email with the form, and we also have a follow-up survey, for you guys to just, give some demographics data. Please fill out the survey. Once again, this is a program sponsored by Verizon. If you guys want more things like this, they want to see that there's diversity in the room, that there's good attendance, that women are showing up, people of color are showing up, and that you guys are satisfied with what you're receiving. So please fill out those surveys and please fill out the form for the Clue credit. So with that being said, thank you all. Greg, do you want to make any last remarks?
Thank you very much. You guys are, showing up to this and, hearing the story, and great questions, super engaged. This was a lot of fun, and feel free to reach out at any point. You have my email, gregory.ugwi@wefranch.com. Feel free to reach out if you have questions. And yeah, this was a lot of fun. I'm happy to help in whatever way I can.
Great. Yeah, we'll share your email and your LinkedIn on the follow-up email, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Great. So yes, thank you all for your time. Thank you, Greg. And I hope everyone has a great evening and continue working hard in school.
Take care, guys.
Yes, thank you, Mary, for your engagement. You asked some great questions.
This was very great. Thank you so much for, hearing from somebody who's actually in the field, his experience, how he got where he got. So thank you so much.
Yes, this is what it's about, getting you guys some, real world experience, having real world conversations, and, getting to learn most importantly from women and people of color. That's something that was very important to us, that we create that representation. So thank you for participating, and looking forward to bringing more content like this to you guys. All right. Well, have a good night. I'm going to close out the room.